How many people are in jail when they need to be in a treatment bed?
We want the services. I don't believe we need 5 more buildings.
To meet King County's complex behavioral health needs, voters will decide in a special election this month whether to approve a $1.25 billion property tax levy.
I think it's a really important first step.
But while many agree more mental health resources are needed, there are many concerns too.
It's a well-intentioned proposal that raises a whole series of questions.
What would this 9-year levy pay for? And will homeowners, already feeling the pinch, support the plan?
This is a problem that we need to solve with urgency.
We hear from both sides.
It really does look like just another slush fund.
Debating the Crisis Care Centers levy that's on the ballot in the next King County election. Next on City Inside Out. Welcome to this edition of City Inside Out. I'm your host, Brian Callanan. King County is asking voters to support a $1.25 billion property tax levy that would build 5 new crisis care centers and recruit and retain the workers needed to staff them. Supporters say a yes vote on Prop 1 would provide desperately needed mental health treatment in a county where people in crisis wait an average of 44 days to get help. But opponents say our property taxes are too high already, and they're asking why elected officials can't provide adequate mental health services with the budgets they already have. This week, we're looking at the special election this April for crisis care centers in King County, and how a vote to raise taxes has already raised several challenging questions.
Coffee or you want a latte?
Welcome to the Recovery Cafe near downtown Seattle.
1 pump chocolate.
Here, the food and the coffee are served hot.
Here's your coffee.
And the gratitude stays warm long after mealtime.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
We say everyone's in recovery from something.
David Coffey is executive director at the cafe, which provides a safe, drug and alcohol-free space to its members who are recovering from trauma and trying to gain or maintain access to housing or services. Recovery Cafe serves thousands of meals every year. But David Coffey remembers the one person who came to his door in a crisis situation recently, whom he wasn't able to serve.
We made 52 phone calls that day to different places trying to get him in, just into detox, and we couldn't do it.
King County leaders say they have an answer in Proposition 1, the Crisis Care Centers levy, on the ballot with a special election this April.
For people to get off the street, they must have somewhere to go.
Prop 1 is a 9-year property tax levy of $1.25 billion to build 5 new 24-hour walk-in crisis centers, one of which would be specifically geared towards younger people.
I think it's a really important first step in addressing the crisis that we find ourselves in.
The county currently has only one crisis facility with 46 beds operated by Seattle's Downtown Emergency Service Center, but getting in requires a referral from a first responder. Coffey says Prop 1, which also includes money to recruit and retain mental health workers, will help more people in crisis eventually find a path to recovery.
We're never going to get there if we're not willing to really invest in it in a way that will make a difference.
They shouldn't be doing a property tax.
Seattle businesswoman Suzie Burke says the $121 per year Prop 1 would cost the owner of a median-priced home simply makes our region less affordable. And she wants more treatment for people in need, not what she sees as expensive new crisis centers.
We want the services. I don't believe we need 5 more buildings.
Burke is one of 3 people who signed the statement of opposition against Prop 1 on the ballot. There's no formalized no campaign. Supporters of the measure have a wide array of endorsements and have raised more than $360,000 as of early April. But Burke says the yes side is getting people's hopes up, too.
These buildings don't come out of the ground like a mushroom.
Prop 1 doesn't say where the new crisis centers would be built. And while the campaign promises 2 centers could be opened by the year 2026, Burke isn't buying it.
Seattle, King County, promise a lot, but they don't really get to the goals. And I think the voter has had enough of that.
It's a well-intentioned proposal that raises a whole series of questions.
Phil Talmadge, a Democrat who represented West Seattle in the state Senate for 16 years and who served as a state Supreme Court justice for 6 more, does not oppose Prop 1, but still asks, if King County passes a measure like this, what would happen in Pierce, Snohomish, or other counties?
Are they going to be providing services of a similar nature, or are they going to have their patients who are in need of these services migrate to our area to get those services that they can't get locally?
Talmadge also says during his time in Olympia, the state was providing property tax revenue to counties for behavioral health. But that funding model faded out, and he's worried history could repeat itself.
We had a dedicated property tax for mental health services before. It disappeared into the general fund of King County and the other counties across Washington. Where are the guarantees that that won't happen again?
Talmadge is aware Prop 1 has a good chance of passing, with a wave of local support for a solution that provides some hope.
I'm probably going to vote for this measure because having something is better than nothing.
But he says Prop 1 is far from the statewide reform required to restore the mental health services and beds Washington desperately needs.
And I don't see anybody in elected positions talking about coming up with the kind of comprehensive, significant solution to the problems that we're talking about.
Now it's up to you to make a decision on Prop 1. Is it a misguided property tax or part of the answer to the crisis of mental health?
I really truly believe it will make our community better.
Every time we pass one of these things, we're making it less and less affordable to be here.
And I'm here to welcome Councilmember Girmay Zahilay from the King County Council. Great to have you here. Thanks for helping us out. And also Tim Eyman, who's representing the opposition to this measure. Tim, good to see you too.
Good to see you as well.
We spoke before the show here and talked about this. Councilmember Zahilay, you'll have the first word. Tim, you'll have the last word here in this discussion. Why do you believe that voters need to support Proposition 1, the Crisis Care Center's levy?
I've been on the council since the beginning of 2020, and I think the public understands that the public health crisis of our time is the COVID-19 pandemic. But at the same time, we've been experiencing this shadow pandemic that has been quietly ravaging our communities, and that shadow pandemic is the behavioral health crisis. Whether we're talking about unprecedented levels of mental health issues or record-breaking overdose deaths, substance use disorders, this is a problem that we need to solve with urgency. And we can spend a lot of time discussing, what are the causes of these national and global trends, but what's crystal clear is what we need to do. And what we need to do is to give people a place to go when they are in crisis so that they can get the care that they need to heal. And that's exactly what this Crisis Care Center's levy will do. It will provide the physical infrastructure, places for people to go when they need care so that they can have a fighting chance. I think we should all work together to give our neighbors a fighting chance to survive.
Thank you for that. Tim, your thoughts on why voters should not be supporting this?
Well, all I hear about is just skyrocketing property taxes now. This is a property tax increase, and a sizable one as well, over the next 9 years. And I was struck by this proposal in how many different ways this looks like a slush fund, because they give themselves that much flexibility. They said the implementation plan happens after the voters vote for the tax increase. Mm-hmm. I think most voters would want to see the implementation plan before they okay the money. Mm-hmm. And it's a terrifying thought that once you vote yes, you're stuck for 9 years. So if it ends up being a boondoggle like the Big Dig or something like that, you're stuck continuing to pay this huge, massive property tax. The other sneaky thing that I think politicians do, and it's not just Democrats but Republicans too, is that they'll put the essential services on the ballot. And then they'll fund the, kind of their pet projects with existing revenue. And if there is this great need, if there is this great desire for this, why not use existing revenues, the first dollar that they ended up spending on this, and the last dollar for the lower priority? So I guess that's I think what most voters are frustrated by is that why is it I'm always voting on the essential stuff where you're not going to get an EMT showing up if you have a heart attack unless you vote for this tax increase? It's manipulation, and I don't think it's a good idea. And so I think if voters vote no, what's going to end up happening is they're going to go back to the drawing board and have to do it better.
So Prop 1 would cost a little bit more than $10 a month in property tax for the median-priced homeowner out there. Doesn't sound like too much for mental health services, but you have a number of other property taxes in King County. Seattle residents, of course, pay more on top of that. How do you respond to this whole idea that another tax like this is just making King County unaffordable?
I think what Tim is doing is absolutely as important as the levy itself, which is when we're asking the voters to sponsor a large revenue stream like this, we need to scrutinize it. We need to scrutinize it because that's how you hold government accountable. $1.25 billion sounds like a lot of money. It is what's needed in a region that has one of the highest costs of construction in the world. It is what's needed in a place that doesn't have any recovery infrastructure in terms of the types that we're looking for. And so I validate the concerns of our neighbors who are saying property taxes are too high. And it's really unfortunate that our state government is putting the county in a position where it's constantly having to choose between, do we solve pressing problems or do we avoid raising regressive revenue sources like property taxes that disproportionately impact middle income people? And that is an impossible decision to make, but it's not a decision that is, $10 a month versus $0 a month, because we have to also take into account the cost of inaction. And the cost of inaction on these issues is incalculable. And I'm not just talking about the moral cost of inaction. I'm talking about actual dollars and cents in the status quo if we don't do this. If you take into account the cost of overloaded emergency rooms and hospitals, if you take into account the cost of overloaded jails, if you take into account the costs of what people are doing when they are addicted and needing to feed that addiction, how you see it playing out on the streets of our cities, the cost is incalculable. And so that's what we have to weigh it against.
Okay. I think it's important to point out it's not just raising money for buildings, if indeed it does pass here, but it would also recruit and retain people to work in the mental health field and try to talk about a number of these different problems that Councilmember Zahilay has brought up here. How do you respond to that, this idea that we can't afford not to do something like this?
Well, I read the ordinance very carefully, and it was very carefully drafted to have a lot of mays and mights and probablys. There isn't a lot of solidity to the proposal, and it really does look like just another slush fund. I have yet to see a King County government program that doesn't go radically over budget, and they wait for us taxpayers to bail them out. Since for the last 10 years, there's been 41 tax increases at the state level. Those have added up to $62.3 billion in higher taxes. Those are on top of the existing highest sales tax in the nation, highest gas tax in the nation, property taxes going through the roof. Now, King County, they just went from a $15 billion budget to a $16 billion budget. So over the next 9 years, they're going to have well over $100 billion. He seems like a very persuasive person. Why can't he convince his members to use existing revenues rather than putting this on the ballot? It seems to me, with the amount of money that they have, if it truly is the priority that he says that it is, why can't they use the first dollar and not count on the taxpayers to bail them out?
I think this whole concept of raising taxes in this way to critical services doesn't make sense to Tim, and also this idea that voters are looking for some assurance that this funding will actually be dedicated to mental health help. Can you tackle those for us, please?
Yeah, first I'll address this idea that these funds are a vague slush fund. This is one of the most specified ballot measures that I've ever seen. The money is going to 5 crisis care centers that are already geographically designated, one in South King County, one in North King County, one in East King County, one Seattle, and one youth-focused one. The money is going toward building back our long-term residential behavioral health beds from what it is at right now, which is 255 beds for a county of 2.3 million people, and bringing it back up to around 355, which is the capacity we've lost in the past 2 years. It's also going toward workforce development. The workforce in this field is depleted, defeated, and making poverty wages to do some of the hardest work known to human beings. And so it is going to go toward recruiting, retention, pay raises for people who are making $30,000, $40,000 a year, again, to do some of the most difficult work known to human beings. And so the idea that it's not specified or it's too vague, sure, we're going to be able to do an implementation plan that adds more details, but it's not vague. It's not just a $1.25 billion slush fund. It has designated pots already.
Those locations weren't necessarily laid out specifically, like where are they actually going to go? Some ideas there about siting and why were these locations not actually put on the ballot when voters were looking at this?
As you know, Brian, as Tim knows, siting a facility like this is going to take a lot of community engagement. It's going to take a lot of negotiation. It's going to take a lot of work, and that's going to come later.
Okay. All right. I'm interested to see what happens there, but I wanted to make sure, Tim, if there was a point you wanted to make about citing or any other piece here.
The more vague they make it, the easier it is for voters to say, well, I don't know where it's going to end up, so therefore I'm comfortable voting for it because I don't know where they're going to end up. Maybe it's going to be in my backyard, maybe it's not. It's that vagary. It's the implementation plan after you vote yes on it. Once you vote yes, once the money starts flowing, all they got to do is just declare an emergency and they can divert the money to anything they want to. You see it time and time and time again. And I think that there is a built-up frustration by a whole lot of property owners that don't realize, for example, that renters, you're paying property taxes. You're just paying your landlord's property taxes. As property taxes skyrocket, your rent's going up exactly because the property tax is going up. So I sympathize with what the council member is talking about, but at the end of the day, the average taxpayer is just looking at a property tax bill that is going through the roof, and they feel helpless about it, and they see a proposal like this, and again, he makes a persuasive argument on why it's necessary. He's not made a persuasive point on why is it you couldn't use existing revenues to fund it rather than simply doing this. And building 5 buildings. There's something about that. Do we need more infrastructure or do we need actual more services, which is what the sales tax is already paying for?
Fair enough. Let's talk about this idea. Maybe we can focus on that buildings piece if we could, because I've heard from a few people, hey, why do we need a shiny new building? Let's just really focus on services. Can you respond to that?
All of the new crisis care centers won't be brand new buildings.
I see. Okay.
Some of them will be buildings that already exist that have many of the components of a crisis care center, but we would need the revenue to add on the pieces that would make it a full-fledged, full-service crisis care center.
Got it.
So yes, some buildings already exist, some don't, and it'll be a combination of both.
Got it. Tim,
so you know where the places are then?
Some of the ones that would qualify for adding components, we do know where those are, but it wouldn't be all 5. Some of them would be new.
Why wouldn't we be telling the voters where those are now before you ask for the money, rather than you knowing it, but no one else knowing it?
Some of them are live and functional at this time.
Okay. I think we're going to see this play out over the next couple of months here. But, Tim, I wanted to follow up on a point with you here. And I hear all the different criticisms you're making. But I think about this. 3 people have signed on to the opposition statement on the ballot. You, Suzie Burke, Jim Coombs. Beyond that, there's no formal campaign. And I found that to be interesting because you've seen the large number of endorsers for Prop 1. You've got first responders. You've got laborers, service providers, businesses, the Seattle Times, too. What does it say to you when so many people have come out in support of this measure and so few are opposing it?
I guess, the pigs at the trough, the people who are going to get the $1.25 billion, of course, they're going to be in favor of it. The average taxpayer, though, is struggling right now just to be able to pay their property taxes and their existing taxes. And the reality is, we were lucky to even get something in the voters pamphlet. It was so rigged where we had 24 hours to name members. We had 24 hours to make a statement. We were within 24 hours of not having any statement at all. The fact that we even got something in there is nothing short of remarkable. But this is kind of what the situation is with any tax increase. People who get the money, of course, they're going to pour tons of money into a yes campaign. The no campaign tends to be the voters pamphlet argument. And I think what I've found time and time again is voters care more about which side has the better argument and which side than the side that has the most money.
Councilmember Zahilay, if you wanted to respond to anything of what Tim's saying and maybe talk about some of the people who've endorsed this too, because I think that's an important piece of this discussion.
Yeah, it's not just people who are quote unquote getting the money that have endorsed this. We have so many legislative district Democratic organizations that have endorsed it. I think it's basically all of them that exist in King County. And those people are not going to get any of the money. They're just concerned citizens that see the lack of recovery infrastructure and how that plays out on the streets of our cities and in people's homes where they're overdosing, or family members who are going through mental health crises. So I disagree with that point. But again, the point about that Tim is making about property tax concerns, he's making an absolutely valid point. And it would be gaslighting to come up here and say that that is not an issue. I hear that issue as well. But I hear more than that issue. I hear what people are saying about their family members that they're losing, about unhoused people having unprecedented numbers of overdose deaths, about our high school kids who are experiencing record levels of depression, anxiety, and isolation. The percentage of high school students who are experiencing that right now has almost doubled in the past 10 years. And so this is a problem that we need to address with urgency. And yes, it is not a simple, clear-cut issue where there are good guys and bad guys. Most of what Tim is saying is also true.
Tim,
I would
please.
I have to quickly add,
Okay.
he is making such an articulate, well thought out argument. Why is it he wasn't able to convince his fellow council members, at least 5 of them, this is so critical. Let us use the existing revenue we already have. We have this sales tax. We have this property tax. We have all the taxes that we're currently collecting. Why can't we make this a priority and use the existing revenues that we already have? The fact that he's not willing to do that, instead relying on the voters to bail him out, it's just a very uncomfortable for an average voter. Don't personalize it to me. It's an average voter out there is struggling right now, and all they're seeing from this is it's a crisis. We have to do something. That's the scariest time when government says something must be done, because Seattle's about to raise a property tax. King County's about to raise a property tax. This legislative session is going to be the most tax-heavy tax appetite legislative session we've ever seen. At what point is too much?
Thank you for that. I want to make sure we keep the focus on this measure here. Did you want to respond specifically to some of these points?
I'd be happy to. It's going to get real technical because if anybody wants to deep dive into King County's budget, I have no incentive other than to make sure that people are taken care of and healing. So if anybody wants to do a deep dive into the budget with me and find $1.25 billion that are unrestricted, not going toward other critical services that we can use, let's do that. But if you look into King County's budget, yes, $16 billion is a lot of money. The vast majority of that is designated by the state. So we have no flexibility in how that is going to be spent. The only pot of money in King County's budget that has flexibility is the general fund. And 75% of that is state mandated to go toward criminal justice issues. So it's already funding sheriffs, it's already funding jails, it's already funding so many other things. And so the tiny sliver of money that we have that's flexible and not going towards state-mandated criminal justice issues is already funding critical things like housing and human services. And so if somebody finds $1.25 billion in that pot of money that's going toward waste, fraud, and abuse, let's talk about that and let's fix that. We have no other incentive than to make this money go toward the right places.
My only point is that this is over a 9-year period. You don't have to come up with $1.25 billion tomorrow. I think it would be helpful to have an implementation plan before you turn around and say, where are you going to find the $1.25 billion? But if he can't even articulate that to his own county council members, why is it the voters should end up bailing him out?
Thank you. I wanted to make sure that I talked about this with you, Tim, just the urgency behind this. If a person has to wait to get mental health services in King County for 44 days, don't you think it's time to make an investment in this system?
There's no doubt. If the county council believes that this is a high priority, then they should have made it the highest priority and use existing revenues. But it does beg the question, at what point can an average taxpayer even live in King County anymore? All these people that he's talking about that are going to end up getting pay raises in order to be able to entice them and in order to be able to join, we're about to collapse as a marketplace as far as the economy is concerned. Everybody's getting laid off, and they're talking about building 5 buildings. I'm sorry, that's just doesn't seem to be the most well thought out. And again, let me emphasize again, the implementation plan we get to learn after the vote, not before the vote. I think that's scary.
Fair enough. I think we've heard that point a few times, but I did want to make sure I moved on to one point here, if I could, with you. Even in the Seattle Times, which endorsed this measure, they said this is a statewide issue, not a county one, and I wanted to talk about this. Let's say this measure passes. Would people from across the state be coming and using King County's new facilities? Talk about this intersection with what the state is doing or not doing with mental health.
Well, the state and the federal government have absolutely abdicated their responsibilities in this realm. We have seen the consistent defunding of recovery infrastructure by the federal government and the state government, to the point where we are seeing so many of our long-term residential health beds, the buildings that house them, collapsing and reaching their life cycle. There was a recent article in the Seattle Times that said, where have King County's mental health beds gone?
Right.
And it is absolutely connected to the state's insistence on privatization, on relying on small nonprofits to do this work, and then not giving them the funding that they need to continue operating, to make capital improvements. And so you're seeing this capacity diminish over time. And so, yes, there are a couple of state champions at the state level, Senator Moncadingra, Representative Tina Orwell are a couple that I can think of. They're working on great things like 988, which is the phone line that you would call to get crisis care over the phone. They're working on providing more investment into buildings like crisis care centers. But the state is not doing what it's supposed to do, and definitely the federal government's not doing what it's supposed to do. And it's resulting in local level governments like the county having to rely on imperfect tools that are absolutely doing everything that Tim is saying through property taxes, which are harming middle income and senior people.
Do you worry that people would all flock to King County if these facilities were built?
I see our state as one state that needs to solve problems. And so if somebody from across King County's borders is going through crisis and has nowhere to go, I welcome them coming to King County in order to get that crisis stabilization care. But you're right. The best result would be our state to step up and have a statewide network of care centers.
Thank you. We need to wrap up the show. There's been a great discussion. We could keep to about 30, 45 seconds for a closing statement, please.
Thank you. The behavioral health crisis is the shadow pandemic in the background, and it has been quietly ravaging our communities. It is terrifying to see so many of our loved ones, so many of our unhoused neighbors dying from these issues with nowhere to go. The Crisis Care Centers levy would fund the recovery infrastructure we need to take care of people when they are in crisis. It would build 5 crisis care centers, a network around the region for immediate stabilizing care. It would bring back our long-term residential health bed capacity, and would also support a workforce that is really struggling right now and allowing them to do the work of operating these buildings. That's what's on the ballot, and I hope everybody votes yes on April 25th.
Thank you. Tim, final statement here, 45 seconds.
I guess the greatest frustration is maybe in the ivory towers of King County where they're making like $20,000 a month in salary. This isn't a big tax increase for them. I mean, you know, Dow Constantine's house is worth like $1.3 million. I mean, maybe this doesn't seem like a lot to them. But if you're an average person in King County trying to rent something today, it's nearly impossible. Trying to own a home right now without this increase is a huge struggle. We keep talking about affordable housing. This is making housing unaffordable even more than it already is. And an implementation plan after you give them the money, after a chance where you have no opportunity to get a second guess at it, it just seems to me to be, I'd rather they go back to the drawing board and do it better.
Okay, thank you both for this input, and we will be right back. What are people saying on social media about the county's behavioral health levy? One person writes, taxpayers won't pass this. They can barely afford these overpriced homes as is. But another person says, it's not overly dramatic to say that one day you or your loved ones may need these mental health supports and services. We'd like to know what you think. Send us an email at contact@seattle.gov or find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Coming up next time, finding the right balance between creating more housing and preserving Seattle's trees. The city has lost 255 acres of its tree canopy in the last 5 years, leading to growing concerns for health and equity in the Emerald City. We take a look at the new tree ordinance proposal and hear from both sides about this controversial plan. That's on the next City Inside Out. I hope you join us.